Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the law, the current events, and the Constitution into your living room each month. Mark, what are we covering tonight?
Well, Jim, I was thinking we start with sequestration.
Okay, sequestration. Isn't that originally when they had to raise the budget limit, and they had a big argument about that back in 2011, and then they decided that they were going to do a budget committee to make it, to see how we can resolve that problem.
Right.
What did they do?
It started some time ago, yeah, and I think that the president chose a committee, actually.
The president chose the budget committee, and that was made up of both Republicans and Democrats, I understand. And then what happened? What did the budget committee recommend?
Well, they actually came up with some cuts, you know, that were kind of even-handed and, you know, that neither side liked. Neither side was very happy with the solution, so that might have been a fairly good compromise.
Well, they did come up with some cuts, and I thought that
but they also came up with some tax increases.
In fact, what they tried to do was, from what I understand, was they made a lot of recommendations to the president and Congress on how they can control the debt. Debt, and part of this was controlling the debt ceiling, so they didn't have to keep raising it, you know, every quarter of the year. And what they actually came up with is a variety of suggestions they gave to the president and Congress, but then they also came up with something very special, which hadn't been done before, and that was the sequestration, which is the automatic meat cleaver cuts that would go across discretionary spending and the military if those budgetary suggestions weren't implemented. So what happened?
Well, things just kept getting a can kicked down the road until the day came when the sequestration came in. And what happened is apocalypse. It's basically the end of the world. It's apocalypse.
Is this the end of the world?
It's the end of the world.
When did this actually kick in?
Just fairly recently. Just what is it? Was it March?
That was March 1st. If I remember correctly.
Yeah, March 1st. Well, actually, then you have another budget deadline on March 30th.
Well, that's the debt ceiling argument again.
So there's a couple of things coming. But this is apocalypse. It's Armageddon. It's the end of the world. And what the administration claims is that it's going to cost 100,000 teaching jobs, which is I'm kind of confused.
How does that work, Mark?
Because I didn't know.
The federal government doesn't employ teachers.
Yeah, so I don't know how. If the federal government is employing teachers, it seems like it's a violation of states' rights because if they were,
10th Amendment.
Because why would one state be paying for another state's teachers?
They would never be doing that.
So that seems kind of strange. So that's I'm a little confused about, but that is one of the part of the ends of the world, I guess. Okay, and the other thing is like 70,000 Head Starters don't get the Head Start.
Oh, you're talking about the program where children get their funding so they can go to preschools and things like that.
But I thought those are state programs.
Those are state programs. So I don't
understand
that one either.
I don't understand that one either. If that is happening, it shouldn't be. I mean, it'd be unconstitutional. 43 million for food stamp recipients. Now, I thought that was a state program as well.
Well, the interesting thing about food stamps is a reimbursable program through the federal government. But that should not be the main issue. The sequestration was, they called it the meat cleaver because it would go across all these various agencies that provided the most important aspects of life to those least able to take care of themselves. And I understand now when they talk about firemen and teachers and policemen and doctors, how could those people all be working for the federal government?
Well, yeah, they said 35 million local firefighters.
How can that be?
Are getting federal checks.
But wait a minute, I thought the cities each paid for their own firefighters, and the state had their own firefighters.
Well, that's
but it's not a federal. It's not a federal firefighter union.
Apparently, there's 35 million.
35 million.
35 million firefighters that are being paid by the federal government.
I've never heard of that before.
Anyway, that's the claim.
So what other cuts were made?
Nutritional assistance to over 500,000 women.
Oh, that's terrible.
So those families are going to starve to death. And you know what it's all for?
What?
You know, you have 100,000 teachers who somehow were being paid by the federal government. No, I've never heard of it. 70,000 Head Starters in a state program that are somehow were getting paid by the federal government. I guess the 43 million food stamps make sense. 35 million local firefighters for who I've never heard of that one either.
Okay, well, wait a minute.
But you know what?
But who's making those selections?
Well, but who's helping? Who's it helping to hurt all those people? It's the millionaires and billionaires, so they can have their yachts and corporate jets.
Oh, so they can have their Lear jets on the runway.
Yeah,
so
corporate jets.
The teachers and the firefighters
and the starving babies. And
I also understand they cut the White House tours. Doesn't that affect every child that wants to visit Washington? Well, they all want to tour the White House. How does that have anything to do with this?
That's a political truism or something. Wait, political standard thing. If when the government gets cut, they like shut down the Washington Monument. They're not going to shut down, conventions.
Well, they're talking about shutting down the federal forests like Yosemite.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
Yellowstone. They're talking about cutting all that
Well, what's
back.
the first thing they'll do is shut down the airlines, and they'll shut down the what people use. The things that people don't want, they're not going to shut it down.
Well, wait a minute. I've heard a lot of talk about mechanical squirrels. I don't know, where they do dolphin experiments to see if they'll swim together, if they're in a pack or whatever.
So you'd rather have a corporate jet than have a dolphin swim?
Well, no. What I'd rather have is a responsible government that decides to make cuts that are truly based on fraud or abuse or waste. I prefer to have the cuts come in areas where there's a great bulk of extra spending.
But the administration refused to do that, because what the administration said is that it wouldn't be fair for them to have to decide where the cuts go. So the Congress wanted the executive branch to have the power to decide where the cuts went.
Yeah.
And the executive branch said, no, we don't want that choice.
Whoa. I thought the executive branch would want that discretionary choice so they can make the cuts where they're most likely to affect the least amount of people.
Well, what some people said, well, that's like asking me, which hand do you want me to cut off, right?
No, that doesn't make any sense, because $85 billion, which is the sequester amount, is actually only 2.5% of the total budget when we're talking a $1.4 trillion budget. How can 2.5% have that much a dramatic effect on all these major parts of the government spending packages?
Well, I think, for one thing, I guess the discretionary, I guess you'd consider the military part of the discretionary.
No, although they lumped it together with discretionary.
They lumped the military.
But military is actually the Constitution, and our country was set up, and as military is one of the main functions of the federal government, to protect our country from other countries.
In the constitutional republic that used to be, but not so much nowadays. But the 2.5% reduction is a reduction in increases. I mean, we've actually had, budgets go up every year, and the budget's going up 4%. You knock it back 2.5%. It's still going up 1.5%. I mean, the federal budget is still going to be bigger this year than last year, even with the 2.5.
So what you're talking about is this sequester is not exactly cutting back.
None of this
to
stuff
like
is
going
ever
back to 208 or 209.
No.
It's actually just cutting back the rate of increase for the next spending fiscal year.
It's not cutting anything whatsoever.
It's slowing the rate of increase.
It's just not increasing as much as they wanted.
Well,
I mean, look, they went out and paid good monies for these votes, and they expect to have.
And they expect those votes to be paid off.
They expect to get those taxes.
Yeah, but I have a question, Mark. You and I run a budget in your home and your business.
Right.
So how is it that we can find places to cut in small enterprise, in your home, and balance our budgets because we have to?
Because we can't
But the
print
federal
money.
government just can't do it.
We can't print money.
Well,
okay.
no. Well, is it the printing the money or is it borrowing the money?
Well, it's both. Both. We're doing quite a bit of both.
Well, unfortunately, how are we going to bring this under control? What's your theory, Mark?
We got quantitative easing 3, which I forget how many, $250 billion a month. We got the 40 or 50 cents out of every dollar is borrowed. So, I mean,
actually, it's 43 cents.
43 cents.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's right now? Okay, each citizen. I'm talking about each citizen, not people who definitely can
pay.
Walk. No, but people, not necessarily people, but every living citizen, right? In the United States is $53,000 in debt, each of them, right?
Well, that's because if each citizen is responsible for paying their fair share of the national debt, it would be $53,000.
Okay, and that's about, because a lot of those folks aren't working. That's 190% per capita.
Well, I got to tell you, so Mark, how were we going with all this?
Well, we're about 35% over Greece as far as in debt.
All right. Well, now Greece. When you compare Greece to America, there's two different things. Greece had no real capital coming in the same level of the U.S., but are you saying that our spending versus income is now dropping to a point similar to Greece?
It's not dropping at all. Our debt exceeds the Greeks. The American citizens' debt exceeds the Greek citizen debt by 35%.
Oh, well, geez. This sounds like a new subject we don't want to get into right now, but what's our second subject?